통화들이야 기지 배기 생계 소식이 소된 수바 미세들인데 체도 지표 가능한데 배미 지수기 시경 공배마스린 다 소자원난다 그배 공대 섬지 쉬워다 내림 운수 마슈공라 공시경 송도다 계실 내림 망배 지팅게야 생계 달린도 제제기 랭메 단티리 딜랭기 내림들 계실 분진시라 지네 페토버 먼저 고디 바다 안에 소자와 용네 인다번에 투전한 쉬에 공라 내림 태양 공어촌에 깔록 남된다 아니 대제소 어제 뒤에 망와직 소자와 남다 아니 삼자다 도티 요반남 아니 공원냠도 컨디슈에게 어제 두지링아 지샤예 근데시샤니 어제 내림디 공원라 고존나 쉬에
아주 벽에 여거를 인식의 여거 벽에를 성로 고구 열어봐 벽에 좀 뒤고 열어봐 안에 인식 갭스는 인식 갭 초를 당해 야가 인식 갭죠 Is it okay? 라 계줄 열어봐 계줄 기타가 유르트는 옷이래요 계줄 제 맞습니다 아니 벽에랑 라 Yeah. Tarin, these also, maybe we'll start with giving you the good news that we managed to restore 7 million US dollar. And Shembatanga mixe shumoche. Most of us, we have already met in different countries wherever I visited. Some of you I have not met. So I think I have provided most of the basic materials whenever I visited different countries. So maybe we keep this session interactive depending on what you want to know. Global politics, China, Tibet, whatever. Whatever I know, I'll share with you. Interactive Shashana on the pass. Okay. Yeah. I'm sure you must be ready with a number of questions. Yeah, Hinda. Who's going to break the ice?
Sikyon Chula. Tujina, Tangbo VTech member Tangma exception, Gadinche. Ani ngi tharing ama jizipema la thiwajik ta ani ama jizipema la sigong la thiwatangna len peje ya ra resons thanda ngarangi thanda chongde de la chagwa gumse zo di ume lam di korla nga pe thonang da ingjik lesu ani ume lam da ani ume lam gi korne ta pheba di phönal de ani gyana yanche phönal de ni ani phebe gi nangchhe di da gyana gi materialistic advancement dingem do collaborate chinira zamling na shiden tu thoya pheba nal rawan ra diga la advocacy gi khande rojik chituna yashi rojik thongi do odi thiwa ingara
다 남준 찬수 동남아행들이 이모 있느니 챙기열에 다딩에 망보슈 슈심바래 지당기 우멜람시아 그 시주디 중림로지 슈웨이나 if we talk a little bit about the evolution of middle way policy then we have to go back to 1973. So His Holiness even now says that he started thinking about the middle way policy as early as 1973. So when we say 1973, because I'm very conscious about history, right? So when you say 1973, what was going on in Tibet, that you have to imagine. Because from 1966 to 1976, there was this 10 long years of cultural revolution inside Tibet, where the Red Army destroyed more than 6,000 monasteries in Tibet, and more than 1.2 million Tibetans died as a direct or indirect result of China's occupation inside Tibet. So when the cultural revolution was going on in the whole of China, and particularly in Tibet and Uyghur and other regions, there was this question, because at that time, no Tibetans could go from exiled Tibetans to Tibet, inside Tibet, and no Tibetans could come out of Tibet. So we had a lot of communication gap also, difficulties in obtaining sensitive information from inside Tibet. And then it was an existential problem for the Tibetans, whether we would be able to exist as a people or not. That was the basic question, because so many things were being destroyed. So His Holiness has to be realistic. So as what His Holiness says today, way back in 1973, the Speaker of the Parliament, Tibetan Parliament in exile at that time, raised this question, and His Holiness started thinking about this. But the manifestation of the middle way policy happened only in 1987. So in between, there was change in leadership after 1976. Mao Zedong died, and then there was Deng Xiaoping, who took over the political reins of China. And then there was little freedom in the early 80s, where you had leaders like Hu Yaobang as the premier of the China, and then you have also leaders like Zhao Ziyang, who again died in 1989. So they were the leaders whose liberal policies also prompted the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989. So 1979, His Holiness' elder brother, Gyaltsab Thunrup, who died this January, met with Deng Xiaoping, and Deng Xiaoping said, we can discuss about anything other than independence. Then we sent several fact-finding delegations into Tibet to find out the reality of what is going on inside Tibet. The third and the fourth even could not complete their tour, because the Chinese government expected that when the Tibetan delegations came from India to Tibet, they would be not welcomed by the Tibetans, and they kept saying that they are all coming from His Holiness clique, and they were, aristocrats before, and they were the ones who were responsible for mistreating you, all those kind of things. But when the delegations reached Lhasa and other parts of Tibet, they were received so well that it went against what the Chinese government wanted. So they stopped, they didn't let the third and the fourth delegation to complete their fact-finding job. Then in 1984 and 86, we tried exploring possibilities for dialogue with China. So we sent two teams one team in 1984, one team in 1986. Then in 1987, because the Chinese government is saying, what do you mean by middle way policy? So His Holiness came out with this 5-point peace proposal, which His Holiness addressed to the United States Human Rights Caucus in the Congress. So at that time, led by Tom Lantos, a former US congressman who is no more with us now. Even now, the Human Rights Commission in the US Congress is named after him, Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. So he was living at that time, and he was a big supporter and someone who appreciates His Holiness. So in 1987, at that time, we had very few friends in the US Congress, both in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. But even then, His Holiness spoke to the Human Rights Caucus and laid out what he meant by middle way on these 5 points. You can look up the 5-point peace proposal. And the 5th proposal is on negotiating with China. So His Holiness expanded on the 5th point in the next year in Strasbourg. That is where the European Parliament meets sometimes in Brussels, sometimes in Strasbourg, because they have two capitals, and they have to move all the documents to Strasbourg when they meet in Strasbourg from Belgium, from Brussels, and then move back again to Brussels. So His Holiness spoke about the 5th point, negotiating with China. And His Holiness expected that there would be some positive response from the Chinese side, but unfortunately it did not happen. So ultimately, by 1993, when His Holiness spoke at the Yale University, then His Holiness said, now I'm not bound by any of the conditions that I have laid, because China was not responding. And in 1994, His Holiness, 1994, 10th March, His Holiness said for the first time that what direction or what course should we take, should the Tibetans take His Holiness was asked the Tibetan people to decide what we need to do in future. So we went through a process of collecting opinions from the Tibetans before we embarked on a referendum which was enshrined in the charter. So after finishing the public opinion, we found that about 64.66% of the Tibetans said, considering the global political situation, what's going on inside China, what's going on in Tibet, whatever decision His Holiness takes, we will follow that. So based on that output, the rest of the 34 or 35.3%, we couldn't even segregate because there were too many different opinions at that time. So based on the outcome of that public opinion, without having to go through a referendum process, the result was taken to the parliament in 1997, and the Tibetan parliament in exile passed this with unanimous consent. Okay? So since then, His Holiness reiterated that he will continue with the middle way policy, and we still continue to follow the middle way policy. Now, after we came into this office as Sikyong, after I came into this office as Sikyong, the 16th cabinet, we started thinking about how do we strategize to achieve middle way. So how do we go about this? Because the policy is the same. Just because I am the Sikyong, I cannot change the middle way policy on my whims and fancies. Right? So also the parliament by itself also cannot amend this policy. So in future, if there is a need to change this policy, then we will need to follow a referendum as per the provision of the charter. That is where we are. Now, how the 16th cabinet is explaining middle way to the outside world. This is a strategy that the 16th cabinet has adopted with middle way policy as the main policy, with no change in middle way. Now, how do we achieve this middle way? Because there have not been very positive response from the Chinese side, aside from the dialogue that happened between 2002 to 2010. And once the Olympic was over, then their job was done. The dialogue also stopped. So we could see, with the benefit of hindsight, that Chinese government was using us more for their coming out party, which is the Olympics in 2008. And then once the Olympic is done, they had no use, so they stopped the negotiations. Now, how we try to explain is, when His Holiness says middle way, which in Tibetan is umelam, when we say middle or uma or shung or center, then you are talking about polarities or other ends. Without ends, if you talk about the middle of this table, you see these two ends, right? Without ends, they cannot be middle. So to gain leverage for middle way, to gain value for middle way, we started focusing on getting recognition for the polarities or the ends. Without recognition for the polarities, there is no value for middle way. Now, what are the polarities? Of course, Professor Samdong Rinpoche has defined umelam in many different ways with 8 different polarities, or ends, 2 with 8 ends. Now, I just focus on 2 polarities. One is the historical status of Tibet as an independent state. The other is the current situation of occupied Tibet under the repressive Chinese government, right? So these are the 2 polarities. Now, what His Holiness is asking for is a middle way in the form of genuine autonomy. Now, the reason why His Holiness uses the word genuine is because Tibet already has the name autonomy. Tibet Autonomous Region, Tibet Autonomous Prefecture, Tibet Autonomous County, and that extends to the whole of Tibet, Amdo, Kham, Uzang, all of it. Tibet Autonomous Region is more like only majority part of all of central Tibet. So with this objective in mind, it was also timely, because when we came in, there was already the book published by Michael Van Praag. It's called Tibet Brief 2020. Now there is an Indian version which is called Tibet Explained. It's a new title, Tibet, but it's the same content of the book, right? Now what Michael has done is he has worked for about 6 years with more than 60, 70 scholars from Central Asia, not just from Tibet, and looked at the history of those times from 13th century onwards, because China claims that Tibet is part of China since ancient times, and they go back to 7th century when King Songtsen Gampo had a Chinese consort in the name of Wencheng Kunchu, and Nepalese consort also in the form of Brikuti Devi. So if China is claiming its sovereignty over Tibet just because a Tibetan emperor married a Chinese princess, then Nepal can also have the same claim because the same emperor had a Nepalese consort, right? So that's not justifiable. When it comes to history, China is on very thin ice. So Michael looked at more from the Yuan dynasty, what China calls as Yuan dynasty. It's only that period when the Mongols invaded China, and then it became the Yuan dynasty. For the Chinese historians, the Yuan dynasty is only that period when the Mongols ruled China. So it's between 1271 to 1368, right? And we developed relations with the Mongols much before the Mongols invaded China. So that Chinese claim of sovereignty over Tibet cannot be justified in that sense. So from that time, what was the concept of nation state during those times in Asia, concept of nation states in Africa, Latin America, Europe, everywhere? Because the present day, modern day concept of nation state came only after the Second World War and after the formation of United Nations. What are the criteria you need for a nation state? So all those came much later. So he looked at from 13th century to 20th century, and he proves that whether it is the notion of nation state those days or as per international law today, how Tibet has not been or never been considered part of China. So if you read Michael's book, then you will be in a position, you will feel empowered to argue with anybody else about Tibetan history, because without knowing the past, very difficult to move forward with future, right? So this is one book that I carry with me all the time when I reach out to governments, foreign officers, parliamentarians, and all that. And another book, a very powerful book, which also was published just before we came in, was by this Chinese professor, Lau Hanxiang, who's based in Las Vegas today. And he was a Chinese professor. When he was in his school days, the Chinese government used to teach them, saying Tibet has been part of China since ancient times. Then when he reached his university days, then he found that the Chinese government, the communist Chinese government, is asking every other country to say that Tibet is part of People's Republic of China. So that really intrigued him as a young man, as a young Chinese, that if Tibet had been part of China since ancient times, then why is the Chinese government asking other governments to say Tibet is part of PRC today? You know? And that remained in his mind for a lifetime. And he became a professor. He taught throughout his life, and then he retired. After retirement, he found enough time to download all the historical Chinese imperial historical records from the 13th century till today. And he had written a book which is not in a historical format. This is more an argument as to how Imperial China has never considered Tibet as part of China. So this is a very powerful argument. That's why the Chinese government is not able to respond, because all his research materials are based on. And he has not conferred with or referred to any other history, because the approaches, both the approaches of Michael Van Walt and Lau Hanxiang are different, right? Because he dealt with, Professor Michael dealt with many, Michael and Meek both years dealt with many scholars, but he referred only to the imperial Chinese historical records. So these two we carry, and of course then the report of the International Commission of Jurists way back in 1960 is also very useful, because that was the history of Tibet was very fresh in their mind, and they looked at it from an international legal perspective. So these are the arguments, if you want to really focus on that. The reason why we focus on one polarity, because we keep talking about the current situation in Tibet, whether it's the Central Tibetan Government in exile, CTA, or non-governmental organizations, everybody does that, right? Whatever news we get from Tibet, we spread it around the world. But the history part, that is the misconception within the Tibetan community, that when you speak about Umelam or Middle Way, then you are not supposed to speak about independent Tibet or, you know, independent Tibet for the future. That is a fallacy. That's very narrow-minded. So we have to be a little more broad-minded, right? And so I have always mentioned 4 reasons as to why we adopted this strategy. One is to send a very clear message to the Chinese government that they cannot distort Tibetan history and disinform and misinform the world about Tibetan history. So to say that, we have to understand our own history, right? And the second objective is to the international community. When the whole international community, every country at the behest of the Chinese government keeps repeating the statement that Tibet is part of People's Republic of China, then I tell them you are going against international law. Now you have to compare that with what's happening today in reality. Now if you look at invasion of Ukraine by Russia today, and if you look at Chinese invasion of Tibet way back in 1950, that is 76 years ago, it was the same international law. There were no 2 international laws at that time, and even now, there's only one international law. So if that is applicable to Ukraine, then why it is not applicable to Tibet also? That's the argument I put forward, right? And there's no reply from any governments. Then we also tell them, on the one hand, at the behest of the Chinese government, all governments parrot what the Chinese government wants them to say, that Tibet is part of PRC. On the other hand, they say, okay, we support negotiations between the representative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Chinese government. These are the 2 positions that presently the governments hold. So I tell them these 2 positions contradict each other. When every government keeps saying that Tibet is part of PRC, then where is the reason for China to come and talk to us? Because every government accepts that fact, right? Or rather, the government should be saying Tibet is an occupied state right now. That's more meaningful. That's more clear to the facts, closer to the facts. So we tell them you are removing the very ground for negotiation if there is no recognition for the historical status of Tibet as an independent state, right? So if you argue with reason, then others, it's very difficult to argue back, right? Then the third reason I keep saying is for the Tibetan people, ourselves. If we don't read our own history, then what will we pass on to the next generation? Like my generation today, if we don't understand Tibetan history, we understood a little bit, our generation understood a little bit because we were maybe among the first generations of Tibetans that were born outside Tibet. But the memories were very fresh in our parents and our neighbors and camp people and all that. So even while growing up, we used to hear about Tibet all the time. And if you give a little more attention, then you can read more and more books and understand more in detail, right? So if we have to struggle for another 30, 40, 50 years down the line, this is also one of the reasons why we hold this International Youth Forum, to make sure that we have leadership in the years to come, even if we have to struggle for long, because His Holiness always says, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. So we hope for the best that there could be a Sino-Tibet conflict or resolution. When you advocate, speak about Tibet, don't just mention Tibetan issue or Tibet issue, because issue could be between 2 individuals, 2 communities, 2 families, and on a larger level, 2 nations, whatever, right? So it can refer to any big or small issue. So to give the right connotation to the dispute, so you call it Sino-Tibet conflict or dispute, because this gives the right status to the context of what we are fighting for, right? And the fourth reason I say is, again, for the Tibetans, that within the Tibetan community, when I was younger, even I used to hold similar position that we should be completely independent. Now, growing up, understanding international politics, understanding what China is doing, what is happening inside Tibet, now you have to be more reasonable. That's how you learn and grow and then frame your mind as to where or what you want to do, right? So, I have always said, we have, I don't know, there is some level of division within the Tibetan community between, let's say, independence seekers and middle way, and we are not able to work together. So this strategy of the 16th cabinet is to bring everybody along, right? And there we are saying, when you go for advocacy work, when you join WETAG and all those, goes for advocacy work, you meet any political leader or media or anybody, first you speak about middle way, why His Holiness adopted middle way, and why it is necessary, why it's important, why it's reasonable, why it is mutually beneficial, as you said, that the Chinese can benefit from us spiritually and we can benefit materially from the Chinese. That is why His Holiness is talking about the mutually beneficial solution. So, if by arguing amongst ourselves, if we can resolve the problem, then we can argue for days, till we go hoarse, till froth comes out of our mouth, or till some nerves come strangling out of your forehead or from your neck. I don't know, when people get angry, they do those kind of things. So we can speak, or we can speak till the other person goes deaf, you know. But how much ever you do that, there will be no result whatsoever. That needs to be understood. Right? Nganso nangkhu joba jarni bhabsa juyona ani rangjen shenge changmalo surji de uza uma shenge changma surji de nganso joba tabje ani nganso bhabsa jirago no joba jam digdo. But there's no solution. Think over this. We have to understand the realities, right? So think over this. This will not produce any result. If we all combine our effort together, that's the reason why we started this platform called WETAG, Voluntary Tibet Advocacy Group. And I didn't launch this from Dharamsala, I launched this from Zurich, aiming for the younger Tibetans elsewhere around the world. So we see there is no need for division when we go and advocate. So after speaking about middle way, then you can say Tibet was an independent country. I personally want independence for Tibet. My organization is aiming for independence in future. So if you are seeking independence in future, then you have to prove the independent status of Tibet in the past. So this Kashak not just speak about the policy, but worked tirelessly for almost 2 years with the US Congress, both in the Senate and the House of Representatives, and we got this law passed in July last year, which talks about several points. One, China keeps saying there is no Tibet problem. So the law says that Tibet is yet to be a resolved conflict. So it's not yet conflict. And whenever it needs to be resolved, it needs to be resolved under international law. One. Number two, the law says that the Tibetan people have the right to self-determination. Now, self-determination is a term that's enshrined in international law, not autonomy, right? And this is very much in line with the 1961 United Nations resolution on Tibet. We reached out to United Nations in 1950, 59, 61, 65. So this is a part of the UN resolution on Tibet in 1961. Then the third part of this law says that China's disinformation or misinformation on Tibet's history, saying that Tibet has been part of China since ancient times, is not accepted by His Holiness, and the US government also does not accept this. So for the first time, we have the most powerful nation in the world, confronting China or countering China on China's disinformation and misinformation on Tibetan history. And then the fourth part of this legislation talks about the territory of Tibet, which is not restricted only to Tibet Autonomous Region, but the whole of Tibet, with all the 3 provinces in it. So we have been reaching out. We managed to get this done. Even for independence seekers, I put up a challenge saying that instead of arguing amongst ourselves, if you manage to convince another country other than the United States, if anybody can do that, I say I will prostrate in front of that person. It doesn't matter to me whether you are independent seeker or autonomy. Anybody who can do that. So my challenge is to put all our efforts together to make sure that governments recognize the independence of Tibet in the past. And now, this time, just last week, I was in London and Berlin, of course, on 2-3 different matters, which we managed to achieve. Maybe we can talk about it later. But one of the objectives for going to UK was to bring in some change to the change in policy they made in 2008 about the sovereignty, suzerainty, all those kind of things. And you are coming from UK. We talked about this a little bit in the last meeting in London. And I have impressed upon the Foreign Office and also the Parliamentary Group for Tibet to work on this. It will not be easy because it was the same Labour government who passed that in the past in 2008. Now you have the same Labour government in UK, and it will be difficult to seek change and review of this, but we will have to keep persisting. I have already sown the seed. Now we have to work towards getting it done, maybe in the next 2-3 years. I don't know whether I'll be there or not. We have a little less than 1 year to go in this term, right? So I hope you got a complete picture about how to explain middle way, seek support. But I have always been saying we have to take 2 realities into consideration. When we are seeking middle way, then there is no other way than by reaching out to the Chinese government, negotiate with them, and then seek a solution, right? Then the other reality is till such a time, we have to reach out to the international community, whether it's India, UK, America, wherever, and then understand that no nation in this world will leave aside their national interests for the interests of Tibet. That will never happen. That you have to keep in mind. So based on those, our expectations will also be realistic. And if we make our strategic moves, then we can slowly move ahead with what we want to achieve. These 2 realities. Now, the trick to get this done is you have to understand politics, you have to understand economy, you have to understand security issues, energy issues, all the things that are important in this world today. Not just speak only about Tibet when you go advocate. Make it broader to the Uyghurs, to the Mongols, to the Manchus, include all those, Hong Kongers, Taiwanese, include all those who share the same fate as us. Then go beyond, go into global politics. Now when we meet with European politics, we can speak about European politics to the European politicians. Same also with America. Whichever country we travel, first we have to understand that political system. We have to understand how things work in the 2 countries, let's say United States and Canada. United States has a presidential system, Canada has a parliamentary system. The 2 systems are completely different. And you have to find your way around all those to get things done. So understanding US system makes it very easy for us because it's just 2 political parties. And then we reach out to the Congress, and when you reach out to the relevant committees, like the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, House Foreign Affairs Committee, and if we want funding, then we have to reach out to the appropriators and the appropriation committees in Senate and House. So that's how we go about explaining middle way. Please. Mike. But Tarindi Tandat Tangbudi is a little large in context.
The material
the material Tandapado Primidizu Utena Pashabegi, Yama Loven Samdoromichi, Kalantiba Nambekable, Chidi material yor, at the Conde, and they file not only look shy Songodoa, the middle way.
dumdengi sikyong dumdengi
the history Thepde. The Michael van Walt van Praag, author, and Meek Boltius. Meek is M-I-E-K. Meek Boltius. Boltius is B-O-L-T-J-E-S. Meek Boltius. They are the co-authors and they are partners. And their book is called Tibet Brief 2020. And the Indian edition is called Tibet Explained. It must be cheaper, I think, if you buy from the Amazon or wherever in the Indian edition. The other one is in Chinese right now. So only the Chinese version is there. But if you're good in Tibetan, the Tibetan version is available in the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives up in Kanjen Kishong. And that was translated by the Chinese liaison officer right now who is based in Geneva. When he was free, he did it on his own to translate the whole book. So the English version we are expecting in a few months because the author doesn't want to make any mistakes because he's challenging China and he doesn't want any small mistakes in the book. So it's taking longer time than what we expected, right? But it should be coming out in the next few months. And once that comes out, then you will have access to that, and that will give you a very powerful argument as to how Tibet is not part of China from the Chinese imperial historical records. Please. So I will try to keep my answer short, but I normally go very long.
tuchinago ani tiwata nangi na dechola phero na ani mi re re tiwa re re tangro na khuga mi mangal ra cheto ani tiwa ma phi ko la su su ming da sane da an khar nangi mi ti tu tin chi sungro na
Pansikin Shoshle, Yeming, Tinsi Kunsali, WeTag Canada ni, Tanya Chiva di Ganzo resources Korlai, WeTag Dojina Ganzo Thanda still develop Chigora Sigula, and the Tundanganzo resources Yaku Mindura becomes, and the Tonenganzo limited resources ki effectively Lega Kandichi to Gray in Yativa.
I think because any new idea, very difficult to absorb and then implement. It takes a lot of time. Even with us in the last 3 years, now almost a little more 4 years, but maybe 3.5 years since we announced this, we already have between 750 to 800 Tibetans who have registered, mostly young people. And we still have issues with the organization. Like in Canada, last time I was discussing, you already have SFT, Tote Choga, all these existing organizations. We don't want to disturb that existing the formation already, and then others might have, might think about ulterior motives that we might have. We don't have that. We want to bring all Tibetans on one platform, right? So what I have suggested is what the 5 organizations together do in Toronto normally, let them do. Let them continue to do what they're doing. Don't disturb that. But in addition to that, what WeTag can do is reach out to individual members of parliament. Now in Toronto, we already met with our friends who followed Karim, who followed Arif Irani, met with James Maloney, who won again. Then we met with, who is that? The other one is Ewan Baker from Central Etobicoke. So we met 3 of them. Now the Toronto WeTag should reach out beyond that to members who live on the outskirts of Toronto, around Toronto, where there are no Tibetan constituents. So we have to reach out as much as possible. We have to create a situation that the members of parliament personally, and when you have visitors like Sikyong or Chidi Kanu or members of parliament, anybody coming from other parts of the world, you can always say, oh, this member I know. When you go to Ottawa, don't worry, we'll speak to him and he will meet with you. That's the kind of relationship we need to build. So these are the areas where the WeTag needs to focus, not duplicate or not replicate what is already being done. So you have to do something novel, new, to reach out as much. And different countries have different situations. So in Canada, at least one advantage is we have also spoken to our friends, members of parliament in Ottawa. One of the opportunities in Canada is to intern with the members of parliament during your vacations, and they get paid also. But you don't get paid in other countries if you intern. And there are also other possibilities, like just before the election, if you, maybe WeTAC members, one can work with one political party, another can work with another political party, because candidates need support when they campaign. And that's when they want to know you. They need your support. And if you are there at that time, after they win, it's easy to approach them. But we, Tibetans, most of the time, we approach only when we need them. Otherwise, we forget, right? So we shouldn't be doing that. So there are many areas how WeTAC can redefine themselves, bring in novelty, because you are young and you are very creative in how you do things, right? Not like us. Leva changu tere marwa, kyunzu samal leva sawa kyangyarwa. Tingi samala samlo tan, shu tan, mangu shuji tian yorwa, depending. First, you have to understand the situation in your country and then decide what will work, what will not work. So these you need to strategize. Now with other governments, what we do, like the United States, it's quite easy for us because we have friends like Nancy Pelosi, Speaker Emerita of the House of Representatives. So what we do is the Office of Tibet, International Campaign for Tibet, and when I go, or if anybody else is going from CDA's side, beginning of the year, every time we have a strategy meeting. Then we decide what we need to do within this year, what are the kind of legislative work we need to do, what are the other events that we need to do, how can members pitch in. So all those we discuss, 3, 4, 5 points. Like 2022, we went with 4 points, right, in consultation with the congressmen, and then we decide what we know. Then Speaker Pelosi makes sure that jobs are distributed to everybody. So that's how we need to approach, understand the system. What you're going to say in the United States will not work in Portugal. So you have to understand the political situation in Portugal. And I also look at export-import, balance of trade between countries, who is on the losing side. We point out these to them, because when we advocate, we also tell the more business you give to China, you make China stronger. The reason why China is strong today is because of what America did to China over the last 40, 50 years. Every time Chinese government is about to fall, then the Americans support it. You don't have to read that many books. Just read one book, Kissinger on China. You will understand the whole thing, right? So similarly, you have to understand political system, political parties, who's more important, all that, and then reach out to the right person. If you reach out to the wrong person, there will be no result, even if how much ever hard you try, because you are knocking the wrong door, right? So that's why we need to know our way around. Langa shengwaya, netang shengwaya, and then strategize. This year, and then you can plan all your activities. And don't step on other people's foot or feet, right? Do your own thing independently. And the last time I was in Toronto, we had a fundraising for WeTAC. That was the first one. In fact, I have been, if we have to be self-sufficient in our advocacy work, then we need to be independent financially to do all those things. So what I had suggested was for the Tibetan associations to organize one gala dinner or even to raise fund for WeTAC, so that WeTAC doesn't have to focus on raising fund, but focus on advocacy. So they got a little more than $10,000 in one night in Canada. So that is an example. That's an example of how we can move forward, working closely with other organizations, the Tibetan community, the Students for Free Tibet, you have Tibet support groups, so many groups. Try to take everybody along, and build a good coalition of all the Tibet supporters. And again, I'm doing that. Nubanyam the Pong Siadi, Yunguata. Shabat Nubanyam Pong to Omar was so Chigidena. Yeah.
Kongla Kamsang Shay, Yaming Latin Zibusang Lay, and in Atanda Sarah Torobla, Yijang the Jangshin by Lomajin Chaido, and ngathring chiwadi nge chiwadi mixe chokche thanda didang chedang siniga gi mixe thaka dewa chaimin de ne kongla gi thanda bodo nyamnyong digi thola de chik chai derwa the chiwa ma ku kongla karshi de sungsana nga thanda bodo chiwa dende kongla jebe kyawang khala chiwa thakar kore dende thema dangbodo chai de disang chiwa ku we kapsla kisi chikla thome show ani kongba kyone masona na shei
Yeah, get to go to which now.
The Niki Chiwadi Pichikumo Chaidera. The Kongola Tumbaina Anzo Chinosa Gamgichimuchoki, Chai Baji Chai Yori, the Ananxing Anzo Pemisa Choki, Tension the Penang Shu with Samagita.
Penang, the things say Dunda boom sums laguda. They say Dunda boom yes, the tongue to say Chul High Mata, Yaparsari. That the Kale Kalang to Yuatang. No, on that.
Ani saya
hello.
Ani ngarang su phimi yong kita kongola ngarang su phimi yong ki thinsap chik chage yore ta kongola gi genkur mangbo janang gi yorwa di nang backups la ya kanye tenge kanye chejong khanero jine kanye theory ri samgi dirwa kanye di the backups la kongola kharang ge dila tonglen khanero snang gi kanye the backups la ngado samsam semshuk cha gi dinde do sosola chawajik le gi re dene chowadilla simshuk machani da muthune tonglen na da ani khandiros nange na lan shojons di thanda nga chwa ku go ge gyumchen lo dikhai nan shiwana thanda nya kongdo shibona singa sara tholobla igi jangeora nganzo tholobla thanda chokchung jigere rikshung jegyong chobal konglai khengire dangi nganzo gi lotare singanzo sara la thanda pheribe doleng lang nganzo khodik shigere dangi do chashana nganzo gi 아 촉중경원에 공을라 군든조랑 저기 된데 슈티어라 아니 땅도 촉비 나올라 미축직 마도요 말에 이내 미축직 디기 나올라 나랑도 찾아봤냐 촉쉔길에 로직 로직기링을 겐쿠 키이라 디디오캅라 망보직다 미기 시간에 상마 카가이드 선발 망보직다 동len 치고 기도 선발라 당무신랑 나랑 스트레스 슈레스라 안 mixing and doing the stress lead them some good to the sangi candy chai na some send a mobile nira. In a michuk till and take some kimane, some shook chang ended a solace tamushoana. In a young some shook district and the solace day near legala to shoot down merva in a mutune lachi. In a the Kongola Chachambana, I michuk the Kakuchimara, in a Kongola Chavanta, me bought the Mambuchikita. 디치드 선발라다 딜라 동len 가르르스 남기는서
당부디게 남준이 즉 슈드고요. 나 로벤 삼도를 비행한저 sab정질 된데 슈버레싱에 디 슈디에 디 가서 아주 나라를 주고 슈중에 가진 런던에 슈이마 이게 사실 샤발레 슈드고요. 림부치 spoke for 1 hour. In fact, 장구샤비는 아디 빠라데 니 디쇼샤 림제 걸음난데. 니 세디 섬 림제 걸어 투샤 Choose Chikalop now. Topic Kare, responsibility of Tibetan youth towards the movement ladre. And Rinpoche didn't say one word about what youth's responsibilities are or is, right? He defined the two words, lenge in Tibetan and responsibility, which is the equivalent in English, right? So when you say lenge or in Hindi kartavya, then it has to come from within you. You have to decide what you want to do as your responsibility is, right? But when you use the English term responsibility, it originates from the term response. So response is when somebody asks you to do something, then you decide whether you want to do it or not, right? So there is this difference in the usage of terminology which also defines mentality of the people who use the language, right? So there, for English speaker to say responsibility and thinking about the word, and a Tibetan speaker speaking about lenge, totally two different things about how you conceive in your mind and how you implement it. So, and another thing, differences of opinion is natural. Because ngazu phebe khabel yorwa mi sumjul samlo sumju nzo sumjul raju thukjus lagi yorwata the phebe ki khabe di yashesale ya jabarina. If you expand that phrase, then it's 8 billion people in this world. We won't have, even if we go around the whole world, we will not find a similar lady like Kusala in any part of the world with the same physical features. No one. You will not. Maybe there are similar looking people. Madu phebe khabaliya drabu has it from you lai jorwa. Drabu madu chikpo drabu ni yoai yomata. Supu. That many physical differences we have, that many mental differences are there. Even with twins who are born just few seconds after each other, few minutes after each, spend the whole life together, they won't think the same. So differences of opinion is natural because people are of different ages, different education, different experience. You know, the environment that you were born, the community that you lived in, everything is different. It's not same. Even if you see the same object now, let's say after this session, every one of you write one page of your opinion about this session. Everybody will have a different view, right? Or maybe slightly different view, maybe little common things. So if you understand that, then you don't have to worry about other people's opinions. First, you have to be truthful to yourself, right? If you are not truthful to yourself, then you cannot be truthful to others. So as a politician, when His Holiness devolved his political, administrative responsibility, people did ask His Holiness, oh, now you have separated church from the state, and you know, what impact will this have? His Holiness said, if a politician is driven by spiritual values, then that person will be a better politician. Now, in our case also, every single day, this morning I woke up at 5:30 in the morning. Now what time I reach home, I don't know. But before going to sleep, I have to think about what I did today. I also have to think about what are the events tomorrow, day after, all that. Think, but don't take tension. If you take tension, it will not resolve problems. It will muddy your mind. Leave the problem outside your mind and then start thinking about it, because for every problem there is a solution. Just like there is sun and darkness, light and dark, it's natural. If there is a problem, there will be a solution. Now the question is whether the solution could be immediate or some solutions will have to give time. You know, we cannot rush things. And if you try to rush things, it might get worse. Right? And then you think holistic, not a very narrow-minded thinking. If you think narrow-minded, then you think only about yourself, your people from your region, your religion, whatever tradition, then your mind becomes very narrow. If you think holistic, bigger picture, then you can apply your mind more. Now, in my case here, you have to be equipped with the instruments that you need to carry on your responsibility. I have been in the parliament for 20 years. Even after 20 years, I was not sure whether I can be a good Sikyong or not. Now, after 25 years, then I thought that maybe compared to a lot of others, I have enough experience to understand all the laws, because I was speaker, and we made amendments during our time, many of them. I understand economics and accounts and money, physical, because my background is economics. So I have also been in the budget estimate committee for many years when I was a member of parliament, so I understand how the money is distributed to departments. So if you understand the laws, regulations, how money works, how much is coming, where it's going, from where it's coming, how you need to keep that in tune with the rules of the host country, because we have to follow the law of the land, right? So all our accounting system has to be in conformity with Indian laws. So if you understand all these things, then every single day our job is troubleshooting. Every person who comes in our office, they have some problem or other. So all your mind have to gear towards resolving problems. To resolve problems, you have to understand the situation in its entirety. then you can come up with the right solution. So if you look at Israel and Gaza now, whether you are resolving one problem now or are you creating more problems in future, nobody knows. Because so much violence happening, so many people are being killed right in front of your eyes, and you will have this feeling of revenge, taking revenge all the time. At whatever age you reach, that will remain all your life, right? So a solution should be such that it resolves a present problem and it does not cause more problems in the future. That is a meaningful solution. Right? So think. If there is a problem, you think right now, you cannot think about just leave it for the time being, 1 hour, 2 hours, one night, one day. It's okay. Even when you are sitting on the potty, you might get solutions. When you are traveling in a bus, car, if you keep thinking about that problem, then solution will come if you have the know-how and the instruments to carry it. So you don't. And you have to be committed, just like Professor Samdor Rinpoche defined these two words, and finally he said, I am a Tibetan, you are a Tibetan, I am nobody to tell you what your responsibility is. So in our case also, my father encouraged me to take up, follow His Holiness, serve the cause, but then you have to convince yourself. Once you are convinced, and as long as you do your job well, you don't have to worry about what others are saying. If you do something wrong, then you always have to fear who might find out about this. You have to live in fear all the time, and you will not be able to speak your mind. So your personal integrity is also very important. So there are so many facets to understand that as you grow, then you will learn to handle more and more problems, resolve more and more problems, challenges. So it is an accumulation of experiences that will make you, and if you become, the best thing is to be good in psychology, right? If you're good in, ultimately everything boils down to psychology. Even an old person I may going to meet with, I may be spending 15, 20, 30 minutes for that, but that person really appreciates Sigyeong coming when I'm sick and all that. So that builds people's faith in you, your relation with other people. And your actions cannot be just acting. It has to be genuine. It has to come from within you. People can see your face and find out whether you are acting or you are being genuine. So, 소수 그 담자 땜부여나 왔다 수직을 해야고 말해. 수직을 짜고 해요 말해. 학벌도 높음 제고에 쩌니려 말. 단도 미 독자 방문 나고도나 소수 된다 두고 여바디 따 땡고 따 땡고요. 된다 두고면은 미규 주고 말 봐. 원데네 지도서만 뒤에 아주 지도 독수 가르쳐 수술 내가 제모체 미 쟁애들이야 견주시. 쟁애지기 쟁애 심바질 러버이는 어수와. 수술지에 제모가 제 기부치니 대 손도지신이 있어요. 단대 손도지에 연애야 그래. 디시 아니 밀을 쟁애들 견주 미 봐줘 라자요 말에 개구지요 말에 아니 심슈 차야가 시차시기로 봐. 이내 심슈 수수술로 때문에 심슈 뒤남에 차고 말해. 간저도 어찌나 단다 민간에 갈라고 내려 똥라고 내려 계시 균제 유연이라기나 if it's a reasonable complaint then we have to take it even if it's your enemy or somebody whom you totally dislike. That you should not discriminate because the other person doesn't like you. If the suggestion is constructive. And if it is 균제는 파 깨져셔네 균제는 둬서 매우체 수 깨져셔네 균제 매겨들에 있는 약을 제거해요만 그 자야래 마도지기 저번에는 팬토고 말봐 아니 슈레세는 달래 독차로로 안디 내주 두르르 마도 야르도 말봐 뒤 이제 선바 롱드네 랑셔바 있나 speak less 롱랑서나 just go away from people 가서 안 칸에 간주문지 정말와 롱랑도 선바 밸런스 상황 촉살 레버 밸런스 촉살 you cannot think reasonably so a lot of things get uttered from you 칸에 마지 된사들서만 가야 루게인 라사요만 소소 파마냠도 임바이네 if you say something bad to your mother or father because you got angry 아니 되게 군중 까난 것도 와 whenever things happen it does not happen because of one particular reason it's a multiplicity of reasons that makes that event happen So first you point at yourself as to whether you are right or wrong. Then you start pointing fingers at others. If you find that you are wrong also, then you are equally to be blamed for that situation. Then why point fingers at others? Right? So these are small, I call it the nuggets of Buddhism, which really helped me in navigating my life, in political life or personal life or whatever. So there is some small things through my experience as to how you see it publicly, right? 건조 보고 충주는 신 지구에는 안주 보고 충주는 신이 팽이 말와. 셴바가 충주 지구에는 수수대스 캠바는 샤고를 마도 지금 시경 민키대로. Next.
Dashdale gaming lasanami nga Chicago Nilane. So, under the current Trump administration, we've seen the dismantling of USAID, cuts to Radio Free Asia and Voice of America, and a pause in aid to Tibet-related programs by CTA, even though I'm happy to hear that you recently said that you were able to regain a lot of those funds. So I know you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but my question for you is how is the CTA adapting to the Trump administration's inconsistent or unpredictable stance on Tibet? Thank you.
When President Trump came for the first term, I was the representative of His Holiness Dalai Lama in Washington, D.C. I spent a little more than 1 year, 3 months in total. And these 1 year, 3 months was very educating for me. We learned, we study every single day. It's not never done, right? News, not news. During the first Trump presidency, you must have heard at that time the White House budget for Tibet was 0. And then we had to approach the Congress, and the Congress was saying the president proposes but the House disposes, which means on financial matters, Congress has more power than the president. Right now, a lot of things are happening. Of course, there are so many things happening every single day. And then he took 3 years to appoint the special coordinator for Tibetan issues, right? That was only in the 4th year he appointed an assistant secretary. Again, we had issues with confirmation of assistant secretary's post in the name of Destro. And then he also signed the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act into law. The Tibet policy of 2002 was amended in 2020. Now it's called Tibet Support and Policy Act of 2020. That also he signed it into law. So generally there is support from the president, but he doesn't speak about Tibet or doesn't speak about His Holiness. Right now, what we are trying to do is we are maintaining good relations with the Foreign Office, which is the State Department, because the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, when he was a senator, he used to champion all the legislations on Tibet, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan, all those. So he also comes from a Cuba background. I read a book about his autobiography, how he rose from the Florida state politics to Senate, and he also stood for president, even though it's unsuccessful in 2016. So now we work, and the message that we get from the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, on New Year's, Tibetan New Year's Day, the message from Marco Rubio was very encouraging. There was also a statement from the State Department, a senior officer, because there were not too many officers appointed in the State Department. Even now, there are so many positions vacant. And I personally wrote to Marco on February 27th, expressing our concern about the cut in foreign assistance. And Marco got back to me on March 10th. He kept the reply till March 10th, even though it was ready by 6/7, to signify the Tibetan National Uprising Day, to give it the political significance to his reply to my letter. And in fact, this must be the first time a United States Secretary of State had written directly to a Sikong. It doesn't matter whether it's me or anybody else. The fact is, the Secretary of State had written directly to a Sikong, and that also has its political connotations. You know, So all the messages that we have been receiving is reiteration of US government's policy on Tibet, continued support. So there we don't see too much problem. So even day after tomorrow, we'll have a 4-member delegation coming from State Department with 3 additional members from the US Embassy in Delhi. The Delhi chargé d'affaires, because the ambassador is not there after Eric left back to United States. There's no new appointment as yet, so there's a chargé d'affaires, and chargé d'affaires will attend the program in Delhi. So they are dividing, but it's a huge delegation. That also signifies political support for Tibet. Now, on the funding side, I would like to believe that we became a collateral damage in the whole process when the United States decided to cut funding globally and gave, suspension notices to every partner of USAID. The reason why we managed to get back PRM very fast was because PRM is a separate section in the State Department called Population, Refugees and Migration. There is another section called DRL, Democracy, Human Rights and Labor. So these 2 are still standing in the State Department. That used to be directly monitored by the State Department, so it was not harmed. So whether it's to do with projects with Tibet Action Institute, but they applied directly to the State Department to counter China's influence out of that $300 million allocated for countering China's influence. And then there is another organization called Zero Point who helps us with internet security. They also got their funding back. So those were programs for Tibet applied individually by individuals or organizations and from the CDA side, right? But the rest, 12 million, falls under USAID. So President Trump has serious issues with USAID, and his administration has serious issues. So they want to bring in a lot of change. And we have been, the people who are on the run in Washington, D.C. are the Namgyal Chulula, our representative in the Office of Tibet, then Tenjula and others in the Office of the International Campaign for Tibet. We all work collectively together with no mixed messages. So we all go together. They both, when I'm around here or traveling elsewhere in the world, they go and reach out to members. Then they let me know what the status is, what is a good time for me to come and meet with the members. Because there are calendars for parliaments when they are meeting, whether both houses are meeting or not. So we have to check all those before we go to make sure that we meet the maximum number of people. Right? So this time, from April 28th, I spent 2 weeks in Washington, D.C. Normally I spent only about a week, at the most 10 days. But this time I had to spend 2 weeks to make sure that we meet as many congressmen as possible, congresswomen as possible, and then also meet with the State Department, Security Council in the White House, and all that. So we managed to meet about 21 members of Congress in the House and Senate, 8 people from the State Department, and 2-3 people from the National Security Council. So based on that, again, we have to plug all holes. We have to keep listening as what's happening. So when I was in US, we were told that the review period, which was initially for 3 months, has been extended by 1 month. So which means up to May 28th or 26th, because there are different dates as to when the order came, So, so there was assurance from the Congress that they will do everything in their hands to get this back, but they had no power in that sense. And with the State Department, I again wrote to Secretary Rubio on March 26th, and there was no reply for that, even in April when I came there. And I asked them the reason why there's no reply for my letter, and I was told that we are waiting to send a positive reply, which means they will have to take a positive decision to give the funding back, right? So then, of course, I went to Canada. When I was in Canada, I saw Marco Rubio's briefing with the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, and Marco mentioned that the retained USAID programs, those programs that have been retained, the responsibility of monitoring evaluation would be given more to the regional offices. That is because they have cut down USAID staff by a lot, from 16,000 to 500, 600. And then in the State Department also, because of DOGE, Musk and DOGE, there were a lot of federal employee cuts. We are still facing problem with VOA, who are federal employees, RFA, they are contract employees by the contractors. So they are two different bodies, two different statutory or VOA is shungulejere. Radio Free Asia is shungulejere mare, contract lane konzulaga chigiyare. So all this, so after hearing that, then I had to go to Japan, from Calgary to Vancouver, BC, meeting with the Tibetan community. Then to Japan, we had this World Parliamentarians Convention. And on the way back, I met with the US Embassy, Charge d'Affaires, and other people who were concerned with the Tibetan cause or the programs, and made sure that if it is referred to the regional office, that's the embassy, by the State Department, we make sure that these people also respond positively in support of our program, right? And that's exactly what I did, and we got a very, I would say, more positive reply, because the 3 months plus 1 month was over by that time. When I came back, it was already mid-June or beginning of second week of June. And they told me that it's still ongoing and we should be a little more patient. And this is exactly the same thing what Nechung said. When we asked Nechung about the finance, Nechung, if you have read Nechung's oracle's statement, he has said, be patient. Ngangring ches, puyinala, ngangring ches, be patient. So it's the same input, right? Now, after that, of course, I had to go to England, Berlin, and came back, and not just 1 week since I came back. I got communication about 5 nights ago that the State Department is thinking about restoring, because when we were there, we were asked if we had to cut down a little bit, what would be your priority? So we said for the 2 separate projects we can still manage, but we need this 7 million. 6 million we received through Tibet Fund, 1 million we received directly, Education Department, Home and Health Department. That when we receive directly, then we can save the administration costs, because when we receive through other prime recipient, they charge between 9 to 15 to 20 to 26% for administration. So if the government is giving is 100 rupees, we are getting only about 70, 75, 30, those kind of things, right? So direct funding, we can, administration costs also we get. So that was started only in October 1st last year. So these 1 million for 3 departments and 6 million through the Tibet Fund, which is meant for multiple departments in CDA in Dharamsala, that they decided to give it back. So 3 days ago, we got it in writing, and yesterday, Meet the Press, there were some 200 media to discuss about His Holiness' statement to the religious conference, but there were also questions about the funding. The last 2 questions were on the funding, and so I had to admit, I thought maybe the US delegation that's coming here for Kodir might like to announce it themselves to the public, but if there's no message from ARCO, there won't be time for them to speak. So this is where we are right now. So we have to be very careful in identifying political support, financial support, why all this happened, what was the larger context under which we have come into. So I've always said, but in the meantime, when the budget was cut in January, from January we follow 1st April to 31 March as the financial year, because some countries have different timings. Some starts from 1st July, some starts from 1st October. So when the fund was suddenly cut from January, then we had to pay up to April. Right? That itself cost a little more than $1 million for all the ongoing things that we need to pay for. So fortunately, we got a little less than 2 million from another source to meet this expense. And then for the new year, from April till March next year, of course, we have to again calculate. So we trim down our budget. Sometimes I think we are being too exorbitant. Being a refugee, organizing conferences in 5-star hotels, I never liked it. I never appreciated it. I think we have to live as per our means. Just because the fund is coming from another source does not necessarily mean to say that we have to waste those resources. Right? So these are things what we have been doing. That's why when the US Embassy said, please be patient, I said we are Buddhists, we are patient, but at the same time we have to keep reminding, we have to plug all the holes wherever it's coming from. And then you have to look at all developments, because now you have these new words being used, recession, RASCISSOIN. So this is, for me, it's a new word, maybe not for you. This is now being widely used in the United States. So on those recession lists, Tibet programs were not there, but the broadcasters were there. That is why it's affecting Radio Free Asia and Voice of America. Now, if Voice of America and Radio Free Asia are independent organization, it's easier for us to convince the government to please continue with this program. But it's part of a larger establishment. So you have 1,400 people in the Voice of America, and maybe less in Radio Free Asia. But to get the whole system back, it's a little difficult. But now, of course, litigation is going on. US courts are full with litigations. And let's see how things move. There was, even before President Trump became president, there was a report from the Heritage Foundation, which is a brainchild. When Trump comes to power, Heritage Foundation becomes very important in Washington, D.C., because so many think tanks in Washington, D.C., right? So there also the indication is that whatever skeletal structure they maintain, that could be incorporated directly under the State Department. So these are some suggestions being floated about, because I read the statement by Kerry Lake, who is now the special advisor appointed by DOJ to oversee US AGM, which is the authority that governs all the broadcasters in the United States. That's funded by the US government. Okay, sorry. On show.
Tashile, Tamvunga Tuchie Shagini, Gaming within Tamchai, Los Angeles ni, ani Tiwa the Injikin Tichoshi. So this is a little bit less of, not really as much of a political question, but in the recent Kashak's vision paper, it was listed that it's very important for Tibetans to live in larger compact communities and to be together, and the efforts that you guys are making to put more Tibetans into these communities. However, for people like myself and a lot of other Tibetans in the West, they're much more dispersed in much smaller communities around the globe. And for Tibetans in these situations who don't have many other Tibetans in similar generations to interact with, how would you recommend that they stay committed or become more involved in the Tibetan situation, the Tibetan cause, and in Tibetan culture as well? Tuche.
This vision paper, I hope you read it, or saw it at least, because many people put it on the Chosham. It's not too many papers, very few pages. We wanted to keep it very, how do you call it, very concise, easy to understand. So it starts by talking about the global significance of Tibet. And in the English version is securing Tibet's future. And this is for the first time Kashak of the CTA is coming out with a written vision paper like this. So you can compare these with what I have said during my elections also, whether I have fulfilled any of these, whether I have left anything else or not. These are materials for study. And you will also get a very good understanding of what direction the cabinet is going, in terms of politics, in terms of welfare, in terms of administrative matters. So all the things that we have said in that vision paper are, of course, aimed at resolution of the current issues that Tibetans face, and also look at the longer term, futuristic way of meeting the challenges in future. You can already assess what could be challenges for us. Right? When we came in, we are very bad with numbers. That's why I've always been talking about giving importance to statistics, because if we have statistics, then based on those statistics, we can develop policies and programs. It may not be scientific, but we can say for sure it's going to be more reasonable than what we are doing right now. Because most of our policies and programs are developed on the base of assumption, and it's not enough. So when we came in, the two problems that we found was the dispersal of compact communities, and then the other problem was people without any homes to call their own, particularly those Tibetans who came over from Tibet in the last 30, 40 years. They have nothing to call their own, not even a single inch of land to build a place, build a home on. And then there are Tibetans who live on the Indo-Tibetan border who are facing a lot of problems, the livelihood issues, right? So when we came in, there was no number about how many people don't have homes. I asked the Home Department. They said, we don't have the numbers. And I asked why. The reason is, they say, if you collect numbers, people will think that they will get something. So I said, that doesn't matter. If we have something to give, we'll give. But if we don't have anything to give, but at least we know how many people are home doesn't have homes to call their own, right? So we started collecting, and now we have numbers. We have 70,000 Tibetans in India, 8,300 Tibetans in Nepal, a little more than 1,000 in Bhutan, but now Bhutanese government is giving citizenship to Tibetan refugees. So once you become a Bhutanese citizen, unlike other countries, you cannot take part in exiled political life. So this is one major difference. And then 50, 60,000 all around the world, right? So now we have these numbers. Now we also have the number of how many families don't have homes. How many families are there in India and Nepal? 18,000. Out of 18,000 families, 1,800 don't have homes, which means 10% of the Tibetan population don't have homes. So these two challenges we looked at, and we found that challenge for one is solution for another. So we suggested, why can't we move people who don't have home to the bigger settlements? Because bigger settlements are getting dispersed with a lot of young people who have the capacity to give birth, and also productive labor are going out. So you have most of the older people living in the settlements, less children. That affects our schools. So it has cyclical effects on every other matters, right? So these are some of the challenges. Now, for India, because of this dispersal, we came out with this solution. The immediate need is to cater to the need of people who don't have homes. The longer vision is, if you have vibrant, compact communities, this will give more life to the Tibetan movement in future, right? So this, we have to always think, whenever we think about something, a solution, you have to think long-term and also short-term and long-term, mid-term if possible. Even in terms of budgeting, I have been learning, I know already quite enough, but not enough to understand all the nitty-gritties of the administration, because I was not in administration before, I was in parliament, right? So now I'm teaching people in finance department, how do we need to go about this budgeting and all that. So these are also being worked on. So we are improving on all angles, the capacity of the CTA, individually, institutionally, building numbers, statistics, changing structures, and creating systems of decision making and all those things. So once that is done, then we believe that we can put administration or the bureaucracy on auto mode. They can do their own thing. And any elected new leadership, whoever comes in, can spend more time reaching out to the world and keep the community intact. And also work on Sino-Tibet conflict, because there's so many things we need to do still. Because we right now need to study different scenarios as to what could happen to China in future. And then see under that particular scenario, what are the opportunities for us, what are the challenges for us. So those are the things we need to do. And you're talking about the diaspora community in the West. Now everybody moved on their own. We are not in compact communities, and particularly coming from LA, you have so many small communities. And if you have one meeting in one place, the others have to travel by 2 hours. So you have sometimes less attendance. But LA is a peculiar case. Not all other Tibetan communities are like that. So now what we have tried to encourage is to build compact communities in the West. So over the last 2-3 years, some volunteers in Minnesota, they formed this Tibet Town project, and they've been working over the last 2-3 years. They have been confabulating with us, and we thought that we could give some advance to them to help get through this transaction and then provide land for housing so that some 300 plus Tibetans can live together as a community. And then there is already another project. I don't know whether they can start this by September or not, but if they get the fundings, it's a private initiative by Dadala in Minnesota, and they want to start a charter school for Tibetans. But when you say charter school, you can't restrict it only for Tibetans. If others want to get admitted, they can. But we'll also be teaching C learning and maybe Tibetan language and all that. So these are new developments that are happening because more and more Tibetans are moving out, and in future also more Tibetans will move out for sure. There's no doubt about it. Whether, but I hope less through illegal means. Now you have moved through marriage and all legal means. There will be a lot more out-migration from here, and it's a given thing. So given those things, if we look at the numbers, then you understand the trend. Now if you understand the trend, then you can calculate the challenges in future. And then make sure that those challenges don't exist in the future if you resolve now. Know how to handle it now, right? Build those capacities. Then we don't need to be, but right now, there are things we can do, there are things we cannot do, but the idea is for the younger generation to get interested in Tibet, understand Tibet, make yourself empowered to speak about Tibet, advocate for Tibet. This is what is more important till we reach a stage where we can build more compact communities. Yeah.
공원 초래야 아니 다른 계지 벽이 쉬게 촉진들라 자라들라 닝 타번에 투지나라 아니 예밍라 딘징이마 아니 계사 다람살라 녀자 사라 벽이 토림롬예 칸도 라바 타스네 따탄다 다와 직친서라 아니 단대 차라다 같이 되려나 다서 베든 당라 슈둑 셈베기 성미신인데 여스셔라 아니 디와디 가르차이들라나 다른 공원 초래야 베든나 디스틱 저와 이게 차이더라 아니 계승이 디와디 디스틱 도메인으로 쇼아이나 아니 공세나오나 쇼 디와디 조 갈라나 따 나라도 창매기 따 남주 라데레 베레디다 랑쟁기 개갑지레스라야 따 베레디다 랑쟁기 개갑지 임베 빵다지 고르와다 따 나라서기 로규기 톨이야 시샤와이나로 심라치로 차선바이나 람롱 중요 말에 가인스나 심라치디다 또 벼야 인지 디숨기 바로라 샤요레 이나 갑 디듀 가시레 개미기 챈다 갸요 말 개미기 챈다 마갸올라 때네 다 벼다 인징이기 바로라 갈로다 수진지 샤오 케르다 타마들려야 땅에 티와 도도디 갈라나로 다 벼엘레디아 랑쟁기 개갑지 임베 빵다 가리샤고 우요레 심라 친이 마임베 빵다 가리샤고 디아 로규기 톨 시샤네 다라이 터지나
단기 예 닝두지 슈인 삼추 마이클 웬볼 뎁지어바 you have to look at the book from in two distinct sections. One is before the whole idea of modern nation state came into being, what were the formations of nation states in different areas of the world, right? So it's not same everywhere. There is no one standard application of a nation state. There are different arrangements everywhere around the world. So if you read Michael's book, you will get more evidence as to why Tibet was independent. If you read Lao's book, that will also give you more indications on why Tibet was never considered part of China, and which means Tibet was an independent country because it was not under influence of any other nations, not Nepal, not Bhutan, not India, not in the West, Pakistan, Afghanistan, or from the north. So I think you will need to study the Shimla Agreement further because you just don't read one source. Read many aspects on one particular issue, how people are inferencing all these materials. When you say Simla-Ching was not implemented or not whatever, not worth an agreement in that sense, even now, Indian government follows McMahon Line as the border between India and Tibet. And this was signed between independent Tibet and British India. It doesn't matter whether the Chinese plenipotentiary ratified that or not, came to the second meeting or not, because there were conditions also. If China does not agree to this, then British also does not accept China's suzerainty over Tibet. Those conditions were there, and China never agreed. So that also lapses if you argue with the UK government as to why they termed the word suzerainty, which is a very archaic word, which is not used by any politicians these days. And if you use the word suzerainty, many people may not even understand what it means, right? So we have to argue back now. When I talk about review of the 2008 policy of the British government that changed, set right the wrong, because history is history. You know? So you have to find out, you have to apply your mind as to how it was done and how it's being applied in international law today. Right? So you have to distinguish between these two periods, before the concept of modern nation state and after the concept of modern nation state, then how Tibet applies to that particular geostrategic or geopolitical region where it comes from. Because Africa might have different notions, China may have different notions in Asia. So you just cannot discount 2014 Shimla Agreement like that. It has a lot of political significance. Because at least it was signed by independent Tibet. The reason why China did not sign was not because of other things, but also because of the division between inner and outer Tibet. So there are so many angles to that. Don't rush into a conclusion, and don't diminish the importance of things that happened in the past. Look at it from different perspectives, understand it more clearly, and then make your judgment. Yeah.
Hello. Dishle kongo sekyongla, nyemingla Yangjui, aninga Yagani. First of all, it is a privilege to have this opportunity to seek learning and guidance from a person as experienced as you. My question is regarding the stability of the Tibetans here in India. As you know, most of the Tibetans in India are stateless, and we have very limited access to citizenship. And most of us see resettlement to third countries as a durable solution, but not everyone is able to access that solution. And we are exceedingly dependent on the kindness of the Indian government. So as India's policies become more anti-refugee, how can we ensure the stability and rights for our entire community? Now, as a student myself, I personally believe that education can be a very strong tool to strengthen our community, but I would love to hear your take on this. Thank you.
Okay, first we have to understand that we are political refugees. Kundungi kalu nambe kaduine kalu nambe kabla ngazo capture was said tani pejotanang mare. Ngazo Senju was political refugees because we were forced out of a country because of China's occupation. So kunzugi zembu wongi tang songsang ngazo chogo chongo ra Senju la. So we have to learn to use the correct word for what you are meaning to. 아니 당기 게 칸을 예 싸고 삼스팅에 단다 대진이 막이 여기 선발이야 시경대 짜르발라 투지 체스리 지 소소소 셰사 청한다고 지래 시경대 페발라 투지 체스 나랑 짜르와인스 누슬라고 워 샤바 등산 쉔게 저기 예 지지직 낭와인스 소소소 셰사 쇼게다 디 먼저 벽에 돌아단 게 알아 라 셰사게 밀파 셰사게 알아 because that samlo tangdang di rangshin gi gyabjong samlo da haku yung da kasha nang re le do kasha ma shiu chigyu be so nganzo mimang gi shabji shung er wa nganzo gi dinde shu ba yin di che ba yin slaba yin na phajo de respect manga tegi do wa general public ine re sui ne nganzo nang yin de nganzo tho che shenba de ma che ne chi shiu ji tegi yu be so na wan chi yon de gi do wa 근데 지금 선방 가서 탄에 배조 당당당 대주 돌아 칼레 삽사 땅고 땅에 디 강준 럽디고요. 가르스나 로 충중 망부위디 양 아주 gem바도 배조 당당 너는 충원 쪽에 랑신 너도 오른 충원 쪽 가요 말 봐. 오늘은 당에 제산타 야가 슝디 Indian government is not signatory to the Geneva Convention on Refugees. So Indian government takes executive decisions on what they should decide with the refugees, including Tibetans, because we are not the only refugee or political refugees in India. There are so many others with much more population than us, right? So that is how Indian rules govern Tibetans. Now, the executive order also says Tibetans who came to India between 1959 and May 1987, and their offsprings, their children, have the right to apply for Indian citizenship. So that's why some of the people went to court and got that, because you don't naturally get that citizenship, not through ordinary, very short process of naturalization. It doesn't happen, right? But people had to go to court and they will have to do the rounds of the government offices to get this done. But then again, the question is, what about those who came after 1987? That is still not addressed. So we'll have to take this matter up with the Indian government. This is also something that we are discussing. But when you deal with the Indian government, it never comes easy or so soon. You have to doggedly work towards getting it done 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, even 10, 20 times. It doesn't matter. Even for funding from Indian government, one of our senior, Gyalutulup, used to advise me, Indian government is like a Jersey cow, that you can milk, but you have to keep persisting all the time. Then they will give you little. So we have persistence is very important. Then the larger question, because we are political refugees, I don't have any problem. I grew up in this country with much less facilities than what you have right now. I never felt diffident about our position. I never felt inferior. Even now I travel on IC, and I find it quite interesting, because every time we go to a country who have never seen IC, then they look at each other and they look at our face and then they ask, oh, what is this document, how is it? Then you can explain. So you get an opportunity to explain to even one person. For us, it doesn't matter whether you're speaking to 1,000 or you're speaking to 1. Even when we are traveling in Uber, we converse with the driver from Nigeria, from many African countries or Pakistan or wherever. So you meet so many different kind of people. Advocacy is not necessarily done only in the office. If you make one more person in this world aware of Tibet, that also is advocacy. Your colleagues, your friends in school, universities, wherever you get the opportunity, if you can make other people know about Tibet, that's the thing. Then maybe I'll talk a little bit about this, because now the question is, okay, do every Tibetan want Indian citizenship or not? If every Tibetan wants Indian citizenship, then what will His Holiness do? Will His Holiness be the only one to travel on IC, where the rest of the Tibetans in diaspora community or in India seek Indian citizenship? And if His Holiness also seeks Indian citizenship, then what will be the political message to Tibetans inside Tibet? Can you think about that from a larger perspective? Then coming down, right now we can reach all political parties, BJP, Congress, Samajwadi, Trinamool, whatever Dravidian parties, we can reach out. And every parliament, we always ask them to form all-party Indian Parliamentary Forum for Tibet. In UK also, it's all-party parliamentary group for Tibet, APPGT. So wherever we have supporters, it's always all-party, not from one political party. Now, if Tibetans take up citizenship, many in Ladakh, Shimla, Delhi, Uttarakhand, they have taken voter card. the reason they give is it's easier to go to Nepal. That's the only benefit you get by having Indian voter card. But what happens is, one example in Majnu Ka Tila, when I was speaker, I had to go down for marriage of one political leader in Kanpur, and then we went through Delhi, the settlement officer, the camp leader, and all of them were with me in the car. And they were receiving a lot of phone calls from so many different political parties, Aam Aadmi, Congress, BJP. And the leadership in my car was saying, okay, hum kar denge, dal denge. This is how it goes, right? By evening, we know who the Tibetans have voted. So we had one classic example. I don't know, maybe you guys are all too young to have heard about Kirti Azad. Have anybody heard about Kirti Azad? He was a former Indian cricketer who became a legislator in the Rajya Sabha, Lok Sabha, in the Indian Parliament. And from Majnu Ka Tila, Aruna Nagar, or what we call Sameling, there was one candidate by BJP, there was another candidate by Congress, and by evening they found that Tibetans have voted more for Congress. And the next time, Kirti Azad refused to come to our all-party parliamentary meeting because he said, you people didn't vote for our candidate. So we get involved in Indian politics. Then even Tibetan settlements, you may have Indian politicians coming and campaigning. Now who will you vote for? And it's not always the same party that will win the election. If we vote for one party and if that party keeps winning the election, it's okay. We don't have too much problem. But if you vote for this party and the other party wins, then we land up in big problem. Right? Even in foreign countries like in Canada and elsewhere, I always tell them, voting is an individual right. No organization, no higher authorities can dictate terms to an individual about their voting right. So no Tibetan community can guarantee their right for a particular candidate or for a particular political party. It's not right. That's what, even to Putila Karpuche, she's a Tibetan candidate, but I told her it's based on your output, what you have done for the Tibetan community, and that's how Tibetans will vote for you, not just because you are a Tibetan. And tomorrow, if we have 2 Tibetan candidates, then what will you do? And who will you support? So all those issues are there. So we have to be very, very judicious in our judgment as to how we need to involve. In United States, Canada, Europe, you are all citizens, you have the right to vote. We cannot tell you not to go and vote, right? But then it's your individual decision, not the decision of a community, right? So for the last 65 years, we have been here in exile. His Holiness has been preparing us for the last 64 years by introducing democracy. That's why even an ordinary person like me can be Sikong today. Right? Over the last 24 years, since Professor Samdong Rinpoche became Kalyan Tripa, His Holiness talking about semi-retirement, the elected leadership have been handling the administration and political things, you know, except for dealing with China. And then of course you inform His Holiness about what is happening, seek his guidance from time to time. But largely we have been handling the administration and we are learning to do it quite well now, right? So the only thing important is to unify our people, keep our people intact. So if that is done, then I don't see any problems in ensuring the stability of the Tibetans in future as well. You know, things may change. We are, as I mentioned before, we are going through a lot of social changes. We are going through a lot of demographic change. But if we know how the changes are going to happen, looking at the trends of the statistics, then we can already identify the challenges in future and make sure that those challenges are not there when we reach that time, if we know how to handle things, you know. So that's how we are planning to move. And of course, education is a very important component of that. I always tell people, I'm glad that I'm carrying the IC. It reminds me of my political status in this world, right? And also remind myself about my responsibility towards the cause. So if you get everything, then you will feel so free that you won't even bother about what is going on in Tibet, you know. So we always say unlike other students from independent countries, we have to realize that we have an added responsibility and we are different. We don't have our own country right now. It's occupied by China. So based on those and how we are trying to stabilize our institution here is all the departments are registered with Indian government. So even receiving foreign funds through FCRA, we have more than 160 registered societies in the whole Tibetan community in India. Out of that, little more than 80 have foreign contribution, have registered with Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. And last 1.5 years ago in the parliament, I issued a statement from the Kashar to focus, if we have to sustain our administration in the long run, we need to focus on our registered organizations to comply with all the laws of the land. Tomorrow, if there is a problem in compliance, then we are to be blamed. If we are not living up to the laws of the land, then we will be striking our own leg with our own axe. And at the same time, we have to secure our land. Last mutation, now we have dug up all these problems. I cannot just blame the previous administration for not doing what they needed to do, but if we blame the others, then you should be doing something, right? So we initiated all the problems. But there are a lot of scope for improvement which we are planning to do. And then also with governments, because I get asked this question a lot of times now, particularly after His Holiness' statement yesterday, in the event that His Holiness is not there with us another 20 years down the line, 20, 25 years down the line, then how are we going to manage this interregnum period when the next Dalai Lama grows up, to a mature age? So I keep saying this is what the present administration is doing. I travel a lot. I've visited more than 27 different countries, and I meet with government officials, parliamentarians. So now, when His Holiness is alive, we get this respect from other governments. And when His Holiness is alive, we have to develop, or we have to institutionalize our relationship with other governments. Even with UK, I told them simple things. I got only 6 months visa. So I told the relevant officers, why you are giving me only 6 months? I have to think 2-3 times before I come to London because I have to apply for visa again, if I have to come back after 6 months. So these small things they can do. It's within their hands. They don't have to refer to Chinese government for things like that. Even helping us with the immigration at the airport. Those kind of Indian government provides me with all these facilities. Belgium government, the chief security, airport security comes out to receive me outside the airport and gives us VIP treatment. There's security being provided by Belgium, security being provided by Austria, Portugal, Italy, Switzerland. Also, I personally don't like all this. I hate all those things because I feel imprisoned. Every time I have to go out, I have to inform the security, right? But for the institution, this is very necessary. Government is giving you some respect and dignity, and we have to take it, not for myself, but for the institution and the leaders that will follow us. Whether I personally like it or not is a different matter. So we have to think from many angles as to how to institutionalize our relations with our governments, with other governments in the future, and how to keep our flock together. How do we deal with the Chinese government under what circumstances? Everything has to have a strategy as to how to move forward. So there are multiple layers of ensuring stability of the Tibetans, not just identity certificate or document. Even without Indian citizenship, one thing that you are deprived of is government jobs. We cannot get government jobs without Indian citizenship. Rest, there is 2014 Tibet policy by the central government of India, which is a guideline for all the state governments. And since the Tibetans are located in Tibetan settlements, land belongs to the state, not the central government. So we have to deal with different agencies, different government departments, and all that. And I think we are doing pretty well. I hope I've covered that subject. Yeah. Shamba. Done? Okay. 당연한 사업이 있어야 돼. 근데 건조 표지 nga 탕체로 상매로. 얘는 nga 모르 땅에 땅 깨셔야 탕체기 매스라고요. 깨셔야 될 흘러신 된 셔야도 와. 더 리버티스 땅으로 마도지. 와. 더 리버 땅 시행거다. You have to learn to apply your mind, not just blindly follow somebody. 와. 아니 야셔서는 내주 신 소수 리버티 땅 시행나 아니 탑주의 덴베기 내가 제토링에라고 로 디파르고 있는 버튼 커리면 시행 거로 왔어. 버튼 마시나 아니 가지고 먼저 빠르체 로디 바로 치고만. 다 바로 고에도 바로 치고만. 그 버튼도 넣었지. 그래서 제가 당불 내가 맞은 거네. 랑가도도 간데래도 짱만 넣으면도 소고 넣으면도 상마 삼었다니. 그러나 내 강가게 레군질로 된다지 룹고 요바이네. 상마 삼단지 제고고도 와. 대인지 선발은 탑주의 덴베 톤을 내가 제바이나 먼저 누버 튀어야 되게 망아 튀은 그래. 돈데 망아 용거래. 탑주마데나 교교교교 탕체 문화 된 생이도 따지 교인 지교인 된다지 되면 you are knocking the wrong door. 봐. 어디 선발은 한 대수 제가 개침물이 조선 망부지 땅게 열에 단에 캔수 대패라. 나 잠잠 땅가 가와가서 두고래 미망우지 나 깨지라면 시기 열에 아니 쉔게 가시기 레거서 다니 담슬라 위택 손도 드레이 남두니 프리레 공생레 레거도사 가시 근데 삼당와는 쉬우시 나와래 딕바이 사그래 가상 아주 무용의 슝진의 연구위네 게르진의 연구위네 미디 깔레 캡의 연구야 아메리카의 슝구 되고는 아메리카 미 깔레 캡의 최뒤는 간줄 되게 열와 당 아주 배주의 전된 땅고래마도 배주의 전된 마당이나 아주 남과 상계의 인슬럽 좋아 레김들의 캘렌치기 슬럽 아니 미무디 판매 배주의 땅 안 된다 죽고야 돼 마죽 안 단대 소소 마장같이 미셴발레 인플루언스인데 개야말 참가도 안 도시에되이나 안 아주 대 조선 당교 주주 당교 7.1공기 미 니모 망보 근데 손도지 구리 쉬어 나 가시 내가 채우고도 와 이제 삼바 안 아주에게 쉔게 되게 됐다 아주 로딱바리 쉔게 갸갸갸 아주 리더 소투나 로 주나로는 아주 쉔게 리더 직동 차그로 와 단당에 키란조 attendance 디날 때도 저 미국 주 공간 average age 23도 시레샤 단당 아주 디날 나시고 날 제비나 아니 로게마 숨주 사스레는 셴바 중원 된다 망치아지 론이 슈네 숨주 바라라 와 and you will definitely live for another 40-50 years and if you remain committed we have leadership for the next generation and your job to prepare for the next generation I 이제 삼바 아니 아주 쉔게 되게 땅 아주 파도 슈 토르고 거래 뭔가 망부지로 토르고 거래 타 링을 두고 거래 physically we are becoming distant but emotionally we need to be close so to do that you have to understand what is going on in Tibet you read tibet.net you read non-governmental papers also like payu.com Tibet Times Pangje all that and never ever trust one source never ever 내주 찍고서나 you have to verify that news with some other sources as well. Because 단다 야나 나로는 용다 쉬우시 두고는 팔롱공다 콘조 가시 시에 언제서 conspiracy theory 찍시에 it sounds like the government of China is going to fall tomorrow. So that should not be the case. We have to be very mindful of how we analyze situations. Right? Get information, analyze it and then make a judgment. 아니 미치기 라바달람상 코독자래는 미 레벨랑은 빼 독자도와 아니 뭐하러 신이면에 코 독자래 댄지 코 독자래 슬랍샤나 당연 라베 손장 나를 이제 칭해지기 제대로 와 독자 간디시면 되시게고 말와 코로나 댄지 냠 내가 바로 제뉴마야 요 말이 이네 독자래 삼대겨 그래서 once somebody says something it stays imprinted on your mind unless somebody else tell you this is not the case then only you can remove that from your mind. So if you are not continuously engaged in information gathering or understanding the society, but only intermittently para deval togo tomonzi da pel kharchaga do chiglab and dikabla khang khoba de chiko ma do maybe you have no sense of verification and you are not equipped with an analytical mind. Then you can get influenced by anybody. Sanye mijiong keja tsikpuji shena ngajo pebe sondo dene pe mungu yorda. Dana dele mijig langcho chiksi mi shemba dik langcho bet opposite simne. Mi digi keja shedi sabala lagwa dabire. Karsan ko zikuji shesha ngarbuji ni shesha arwa. Yan digi dokcho de shewa ine dile lagwa dabul. Ta sula jabjo yor lagwa. Rwa. Because susu langcho tembu mere. Susu neju yabo gochona susu langcho tembu chaba ina mi shemba le ishi nyeba sogugo ine sotugurilla mi shemba susu gogo tanga dewa cheba ine di marata stan pashe yorwa di pekeshumure di chetuwa ina ani nganju chiso our community will no more be a gossip mongering community, that you don't need to depend on all these trashes that are going on in social media. Right? You can decide for yourself. You need to develop an analytical mind, and that you can develop only if you are equipped to do certain things in a certain way. Right? And we have a lot of hope. I keep saying I try to meet with the younger generation as much as possible wherever I travel around the world if there is time. If there is shortage of time, then sometimes we have to do away with it. Otherwise, we go and speak to the youngsters to encourage you to be part of the larger movement. But when you attend and give so much attention, then it inspires us also. We feel that, okay, future is in good hands. Right? Maumba ganking and nangda mindua samsan was. Tang aranzo to the Hota Badaji Chabina and Maumba, the Pebe Canyon Sen and Ganzo Perto. Then Sema Tuine, Maumba Goti Dua Samsan Wajigi. So we are Pajasuja Simshu Pare chair, Tangazo. And Anzoni image Shidure. Tangalo took juice lepto yore, Lokazo Degimat, Serumbushi, then a some came, Eko Shidure, Azushi Savage, Kunzo Ganki or Madaji, Shambasu Ganki water. Miri Shambaji, Kuji Kunzo Ganzu Ganki Roches. Chisangazo VTAG there, Tibetans for Tibet, Lagoedi. Pebe tabzuri, peba dun turni, and Shamba Jabjo chairs, hair or Madaji, Mi Shamba Samalo dun tangenga, Jablo Tegi instant, Tiumarwa. We should lead from the front. The Indian summer and it counts with time day, Sosu Tonanchin, Tachin, it's on the Perine, Radu, Pame Uzukan, Tangayune, Radu, Kibutanga Yongo Samne Yoyune, Radu, Kanda de, let's have a jailer, and you go batan, Miutan, Yumzentang. 조선 칸데 땅그 유메당 상말로 삼단체 나는 겐치유 삼체 두주 주수 마당 마체 무 토라 마당 마체체 상말로 후다바다 제로 샤베이나 안 다른 가지고 대치리 공기 겐셰 두주 망부지 땅 조선 땅 제바디 고쳐버려 안 되면은 토라 제만한 출루어데 지거래 아니 벽에 당기 출루 인삼 벽에 따가도 요만다 와 근데 지마 잡지 남아서 고마시로나 상을로 다 리더 숙충부 차그래서 연락 도매 리더 망타네야 저거 쇼로 이네 간 여버디게 다른 캬스 디 팽에 나오는 야자 망치아지기 겐치 키로 차비나 아니 가서 배틀로 되고 쇼지 원사래 봐 안테리시 나로나 신슈엔 투셰
공원촌에 갈롭 남들 삽신게 온나 와들라니 치리 레군다 dari sojawa yongne lariani samdi tujina shuyayi andi shune nganzo kongoda ani sojawa ani nganzo leje sangmal hendu kubarji twenche hana nganzo
ko chilolbe
lerimde
ya
tuche
olos an tuche
seta shoje number 2 translation device ti yana ani par kyen sa